On the night Elira turned 18, the god beneath the kingdom spoke her name. She had been told all her life that she was blessed, chosen, sacred. But gods do not whisper to the blessed. They whisper to the condemned. The kingdom of Ardalith had been built on stone older than memory. White towers rose toward the sky. Golden banners hung from balconies. Priests walked marble halls in robes the color of bone. And beneath it all, beneath the temple, beneath the palace, beneath the streets paved with devotion, something waited. Elira had never seen the lower vaults. No one had. But she felt them. Sometimes at night, when the wind stopped, she would feel the floor tremble gently beneath her bed, as if something below shifted in its sleep. Elira had been brought to the temple as an infant. No parents, no history, only a mark on her wrist shaped like a broken circle. The high priest had called it a sign, a gift. "You are chosen," he told her when she was old enough to understand. "You will save us all." She believed him. She wanted to. She prayed longer than the others, studied harder, spoke softer, because if she was meant to save them, she would do it perfectly. But lately, the priests avoided her eyes. Their smiles were thinner, their blessings shorter. And tonight, the night of her 18th name day, the temple bells rang lower than usual, not joyful, heavy, as if mourning something not yet lost. Elira stood before the ceremonial mirror in her white dress. Candles flickered behind her. Her reflection seemed delayed, just a fraction. She blinked. It returned to normal. And then the whisper came, not from the door, not from the corridor, from beneath. "Elira." It was not loud. It did not echo. It settled inside her chest like smoke. The candles dimmed. The air thickened. And suddenly, she was no longer in her chamber. Stone. Darkness. A vast hollow chamber lit by a single vertical fracture of light. And on the other side of it, a figure. Tall, unmoving, formed of shadow and something older than shadow. His voice did not move his lips. "You finally hear me." Elira tried to speak. No sound came. "You were never meant to save them," the figure said. "You were meant to replace the last one." Her breath caught. The crack of light between them pulsed. "Who are you?" she whispered. The darkness shifted, and for the first time, she saw his eyes. Not monstrous, not cruel, ancient, tired. "I am Velor." The name struck like thunder beneath the earth. The tremor she had felt her entire life was not the temple settling. It was him, waiting. The chamber shook. The fracture of light flickered violently, and Velor stepped closer to the barrier. His hand lifted, almost reaching hers. "You think you are their salvation," he said softly, "but you are their sacrifice." The crack of light flared, blinding, and Elira woke on the temple floor. Candles extinguished, door open, footsteps rushing toward her, and deep beneath the kingdom, something laughed quietly in the dark. The priests said it was exhaustion. They said Elira had fainted from nerves. They said the temple stones did not tremble, but when she closed her eyes that night, the tremor returned. And this time, she was not afraid. Morning light filtered through the high temple windows. Everything looked normal. White marble, golden incense smoke, chanting voices, but beneath the surface of every prayer, Elira felt something listening. The high priest's gaze lingered too long on her wrist, on the broken circle mark. "You must rest," he told her. "Your role approaches." My role. The words no longer felt holy. They felt rehearsed. That evening, she did not wait for sleep. She knelt on the cold floor, placed her palm against the stone, and whispered, "Vailor." Silence. Then, warmth beneath her hand. The stone rippled like disturbed water. The world dissolved. She stood once more before the fracture of light, but this time, Vailor stood closer, not reaching, watching. "You called me," his voice echoed within her bones. "I wanted answers." "You want truth," he corrected. The crack between them flickered. "You were not chosen because you are pure," he said quietly. "You were chosen because you can survive me." The words struck deeper than fear. "Survive you? For what?" Vailor's eyes darkened. "To replace the last one." The chamber trembled. Memories not her own flashed across the air. A girl in white, a blade, blood across stone. Silence. Elira staggered back. "No." "Yes?" "You are their seal," Vailor said. "Every century they bind me again with a life." "Why you?" she demanded. A pause. Long, heavy. "Because I was never meant to be a god." The fracture flared violently. His form flickered, almost human. Almost. "They turned me into ruin," he whispered, "and they call it salvation." The bitterness in his voice was not monstrous. It was wounded. For the first time, Elira did not see a god. She saw a prisoner. The chamber began to collapse. The fracture of light widened slightly. Vailor stepped closer to the barrier. "If you complete the ritual," he said softly, "I remain bound. And if I refuse," his eyes lifted to hers, "then I walk free." The ground cracked beneath her feet. The temple bells began ringing above. Not celebration, warning. "And Elira," his voice lowered, "if I walk free, the kingdom will not survive me." She woke gasping, temple guards at her door, torches lit, priests whispering urgently in the corridor, and beneath the stone, the fracture had grown. Elira did not sleep the next night. She waited. Not for priests, not for bells, for him. And when the tremor came, she did not resist it. This time, the chamber formed instantly around her. The fracture of light between them had widened, not broken, but thinner. Vailor stood closer than before. No thunder, no spectacle. Only stillness. "You returned," he said. "You knew I would," she replied. Silence passed between them. Not hostile, measured. "You should fear me," Vailor said quietly. "Should I?" she asked. His eyes darkened. "Yes." "You asked why?" he said. "Why you were chosen." The air around him flickered, and the chamber shifted. Visions appeared in the stone. A girl kneeling, white robes, hands shaking, a blade in her grip, priests chanting, the fracture glowing, blood striking stone, the girl collapsing, the crack sealing again, the image faded. "They called it salvation," Vailor said. "They called it protection." His voice hardened. "It was execution." Elira's breath trembled. "How many?" "Enough." The word echoed. "You could break free," Elira whispered. The fracture pulsed in response. "Yes? Then why don't you?" For the first time, Valor stepped directly against the barrier. The light hissed where his shadow touched it. "If I tear this open," he said softly, "the seal does not simply shatter." His eyes locked onto hers. "It collapses." The chamber trembled at the weight of the word. "And when it collapses," he continued, "everything above it follows. The temple, the city, the kingdom, ruined. You would destroy them," she said. His expression did not change. "I would not stop it." The silence between them was no longer fear. It was understanding. "You hate them," she whispered. Velor's jaw tightened. "I hate what they made me." The fracture flared, and for a brief moment, his form solidified more clearly. Not monstrous, not deformed, ancient, scarred, human. Once. "They turned me into ruin," he said, "and chained me to mercy." The bitterness in that sentence felt heavier than wrath. Elira stepped closer to the fracture, closer than before. "If I refuse the ritual," she said carefully, "would you protect them?" Valor did not answer immediately. His hand rose, hovering inches from the barrier. "If you refuse the ritual," he said, "they will hunt you." The chamber trembled again. "And if they try to harm you—" The crack splintered slightly under his shadow. His voice lowered. "I will choose you." The words were not romantic. They were dangerous. The fracture flared violently, and Elira was torn back into her body. She woke to the sound of temple doors slamming shut, guards posted in the corridors, whispers spreading like wildfire, and beneath the kingdom, the seal groaned. The temple had always been quiet, not silent, but reverent. There was a difference. Silence felt empty. Reverence felt watched. Elira had grown up beneath ceilings painted with saints and saviors, beneath chandeliers shaped like stars, beneath the constant murmur of prayers braided together like threads in a tapestry. But now, the reverence felt thinner, as if something beneath it strained against its weight. The tremors had become more frequent, soft, almost polite, like a prisoner tapping gently against a wall, waiting. When Elira walked the marble corridors, conversations stopped, not abruptly, subtly, a pause too long, eyes lowered too quickly. Hands that once rested warmly on her shoulders now hovered in hesitation before touching her at all. The high priest had not summoned her in 2 days. That alone unsettled her. For 18 years, she had been instructed, prepared, corrected, shaped. Now, she was being avoided, and avoidance felt far more dangerous than instruction. There were places in the temple novices were not meant to enter. Elira had obeyed that rule her entire life. Until tonight. The lower archive corridor was colder than the rest of the structure. The candles here burned blue at their edges. The air tasted of dust and old parchment. She carried a single lantern, its glow trembling slightly in her hand. The tremor beneath the stone pulsed again. Closer, not violent. Aware. "You should not be here." The voice did not echo through the hall. It moved through her. She did not startle this time. "Then why does it feel like I belong here?" she whispered back. No answer came, but the warmth beneath her ribs deepened. She found it by accident, a ledger bound in cracked leather. No title, no gold embossing like the others, hidden between volumes of ceremonial doctrine. Her fingers hesitated, then opened it. Names, dozens, all written in the same careful hand, each followed by a single date. And then, nothing. No lineage, no burial, no record of departure, only silence after the date. She traced the most recent entry. It had been exactly 100 years ago. Her throat tightened. "Enough," Valor's voice murmured, but she kept reading. At the bottom of the final page, a word written faintly, almost scratched out. "Seal, renewed." Her hand trembled. "They told you I was salvation," Valor said quietly. "They never told you what I was." She swallowed. "A prison." "Yes." Footsteps echoed faintly above. She closed the ledger and slid it back into place. But something inside her had shifted. Faith had always felt like solid ground. Now, it felt like glass. And somewhere beneath it, pressure. When she returned to her chamber, the bells began to ring again. Not the full peal of celebration, just 3 low tones, a warning signal. She approached her mirror. Candles flickered around her reflection, but tonight, the delay was clearer. Her reflection blinked half a second after she did. Her heart pounded. "Valor," she breathed. The glass fractured, not shattering, splitting vertically, like the crack in his chamber. And suddenly, she stood there again. The fracture between them was wider now, the light no longer steady. It flickered like a failing star. Valor stood close enough now that she could see detail in his expression. Fine lines across his brow, a scar tracing his jaw. His eyes, not black, but a deep, storm-laden gray. "You went looking for proof," he said. "You knew. I hoped you were lying. I do not lie to you." There was no arrogance in it, only certainty. She stepped closer. The heat of the fracture brushed her skin like sun through glass. "Why me?" she whispered. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand again, hovering near the barrier. "You carry the mark," he said finally. "The broken circle." She glanced at her wrist. The faint sigil pulsed softly. "It is not a blessing," he continued. "It is compatibility. With you, with the ruin." The chamber trembled. The word lingered. Ruin. "You could break it," she said again. "You could end this cycle." Valor's expression hardened. "And become what they fear?" The fracture flared violently. "If I tear this open by force," he said slowly, "the collapse will not discriminate." She understood. Temples would fall, homes would crumble, children would die. The kingdom would not survive him unbound. "So you stay," she whispered. "Yes." "For them?" His eyes darkened. "For control." The honesty struck her harder than rage would have. "I was forged into catastrophe," he said. "They made me a weapon and chained the trigger." The tremor beneath the chamber grew stronger. For a moment, fear returned, not of him, of what he endured. The space between them felt smaller now, more fragile. She stepped closer than before, close enough that the light between them brushed her cheek. It burned, but she did not move back. "If I refuse," she said carefully, "they will kill me." "Yes." "And you will let them?" Silence. The chamber trembled again. His jaw tightened. The light hissed against his shadowed fingers. "No." It was barely audible, but it shook the fracture. "You would break the seal for me." His gaze locked with hers. "I would break the world for you." The words were not romantic. They were devastating. The fracture split slightly, a hairline crack spreading downward. For the first time, the seal had physically changed. The tremor surged violently. and Elira was ripped back into her body. She gasped, awake to shouting. Temple guards stormed the corridors. The high priest's voice carried through stone, tight with fear. "Secure the lower vault." Secure. The word echoed in her mind. They felt it too. The crack, the weakening, and deep beneath the kingdom. Valor stood alone before the thinning barrier. For the first time in centuries, he smiled. Not in cruelty, in certainty. The seal was failing, and so was her faith. The temple did not sleep that night. Torches burned along the corridors long past midnight. Boots echoed where silence once ruled. Whispers crawled through the stone like insects seeking cracks. Elira stood at her chamber window and watched the courtyard below. Guards, more than usual. The high priest rarely deployed soldiers inside sacred grounds. Something had changed. No. Something had been noticed, and she knew exactly what. Beneath her bare feet, the stone felt warmer than before. Alive. Waiting. She pressed her palm against the floor. The tremor responded immediately. Not violent, eager. Valor. The name felt different now. Less forbidden, more inevitable. The air thickened. Candles bent inward as if inhaled by unseen lungs, and the world folded. The chamber returned, but it was not as she had seen it before. The fracture between them had widened another inch. Thin streams of golden light spilled downward like molten rain. The barrier flickered, unstable. Valor stood closer than ever, close enough that she could see the texture of the scars across his hands. Close enough to feel the heat of him through the crack. "You should not have come tonight," he said. His voice was low, not threatening, concerned. "They are afraid," she answered. "They should be." The chamber pulsed. For the first time, Elira did not stop several steps away. She walked forward until the light from the fracture brushed her skin. It burned. Not painfully, but insistently. "You said the seal is failing," she whispered. "Yes. Because of me?" A pause. "Because of us." The word lingered. Us. It echoed strangely in a chamber built for isolation. Above them, faint sounds reverberated through stone. Distant chanting. Different from prayer. Sharpened. Focused. Valor's jaw tightened. "They are reinforcing the sigils." "You can feel that?" "I feel every attempt to bind me." The fracture sparked violently. A pulse of energy shot outward and grazed Elira's wrist. She gasped. The broken circle mark flared with light. Valor stepped back. "Do not stand so close." "Why?" His eyes darkened. "Because if the seal weakens further." He stopped. She did not. She stepped closer again. The light between them roared softly, reacting to her proximity. Her heart pounded, not from fear, from gravity, from the pull that had been building since the first whisper. "You are not what I imagined," she said quietly. "And what did you imagine?" "A monster." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "That would be easier." The chanting above intensified. The fracture pulsed in rhythm. Valor lifted his hand. Slowly, deliberately. Not toward her. Toward the barrier. Energy crackled around his fingers. "If they strengthen the seal," he said softly, "it will hurt you." Why? Because you are linked to it. Her breath caught. Linked. Not chosen. Not blessed. Linked. Another tremor shook the chamber. The fracture flickered violently, thinning for a heartbeat. In that single instant, the barrier weakened. Instinct overrode thought. Elira lifted her hand. Violor did the same. Light exploded between them. Their palms met, not fully, not cleanly, but enough for contact. The moment their skin brushed, the chamber erupted. Golden light shot outward in violent waves. The fracture screamed like tearing metal. Elira felt heat surge through her veins. Not burning, transforming. Memories flooded her mind, not her own. Fire, chains, voices condemning, a crown forced upon unwilling hands. Valor staggered backward as if struck. The barrier snapped back into place, stronger for a heartbeat, then weaker, much weaker. Silence fell. Thick. Breathing hard, Elira stared at her hand. No wound, no ash, only the broken circle mark, now glowing faintly. Valor looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. You survived. You doubted that? Yes. Honesty again. Raw, unfiltered. No one has touched me in centuries, he said, and lived. The air between them shifted, not violent now, intimate, dangerous in a different way. Above, the chanting faltered. Something had been felt. The temple knew. They will know, Valor murmured. They already do. Elira swallowed. What did we do? His gaze moved to the fracture. Hairline cracks now spidered outward from the point where their hands met. We accelerated it. Her pulse raced. The seal was breaking faster now, because of her, because of them. Footsteps thundered overhead. The chamber shook more violently. Valor's expression hardened. They are coming to the lower vault. For you? For you. The words settled heavily. They will test you, he continued. Press you. Break you if they must. And if they try? His eyes lifted slowly. The chamber darkened around him. If they try to harm you. The fracture flared violently in response to his rising power. I will not remain passive. The threat was not theatrical. It was absolute. The stone trembled again, stronger now. Elira felt herself being pulled back, the chamber dissolving. Valor, his voice reached her one last time. You are no longer merely their sacrifice. The fracture glowed brighter. You are the key. The world snapped. She collapsed onto her chamber floor. The door burst open. Guards flooded in. Behind them, the high priest stood rigid, pale. His eyes fell immediately to her wrist, the glowing mark. His voice was no longer gentle. What have you done? Elira lifted her gaze. For the first time in her life, she did not bow her head. Below them, deep beneath stone, the seal pulsed, and for the first time in centuries, Valor felt hope. The high priest did not shout. He did not need to. Silence, when wielded correctly, could feel heavier than rage. Elira remained on her knees in the center of her chamber as the guards withdrew to the doorway. Torches burned brighter than usual. Their light flickered against stone like nervous breath. The high priest stepped closer. Slowly, his gaze never left her wrist. The broken circle mark glowed faintly beneath her skin. Not gold, not white, something deeper, something alive. "What have you done?" he repeated, this time softer, more dangerous. Elira rose to her feet. "I touched him." The words did not echo. They settled, heavy, irreversible. The high priest inhaled sharply. "That is not possible." "It is." His eyes flicked toward the floor as if expecting it to open beneath them. "And what did he give you?" "Nothing." She hesitated. "Everything." The tremor came then. Not subtle, not polite. The entire chamber shuddered violently. Candles toppled. Stone dust fell from the ceiling. The high priest staggered. For a fraction of a second, fear cracked his composure. He masked it quickly, but Elira saw it. "You will come with me," he said. Not a request. They escorted her through corridors she had never walked before. Downward, past carved arches depicting salvation and victory, past murals of radiant gods standing triumphant over shadowed ruin. How ironic. The lower vault doors stood open. Massive iron hinges groaned as they descended. The air grew colder, then warmer, then charged, as if lightning lingered invisibly beneath the stone. She felt him immediately. Velor, awake, alert, watching. They stopped before a circular chamber carved deep beneath the temple. Runes pulsed faintly along the walls. In the center of the floor, a massive sigil identical to the mark on her wrist, only larger, older, cracked. The high priest turned to her. "This is where the ritual occurs." Elira's heart tightened. She had imagined a sanctified altar, golden light, divine blessing. Not this, not a prison floor etched in chains. "You were brought here as an infant," he continued. "You have always belonged to this chamber." Belonged. The word scraped against her spine. The sigil flared suddenly. A pulse of light shot upward. Elira gasped. Her wrist burned violently. She clutched it. The mark glowed brighter in response to the floor. Linked. Not chosen. Linked. The high priest saw it too. His expression shifted from certainty to calculation. "You have accelerated the seal." "Yes." "You endangered the kingdom." "Yes." The honesty startled even her. Another tremor ripped through the chamber. This one stronger. Cracks splintered outward along the stone circle. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. The high priest's voice hardened. "You will not see him again." The air changed instantly. Velor felt that. Deep below, the fracture flared violently. Stone groaned. Elira lifted her chin. "You cannot stop me." The high priest stepped closer. "You misunderstand your position." "No," she said quietly. "For the first time, I understand it perfectly." The sigil erupted. A surge of energy burst from the floor and struck her directly. She cried out, but did not fall. The mark on her wrist absorbed the pulse. Golden veins of light traced briefly up her arm before fading. The high priest stared. A murmur spread among the guards. "She is stabilizing it," one whispered. "No," another corrected. "She is sinking with it." The high priest's jaw tightened. He approached the edge of the circle. "Do you feel him?" he asked. Elira closed her eyes. Yes, she felt Velor. Not as a whisper, not as a voice, as presence, strong, steady, closer than before. "Yes," she breathed. "And does he command you?" She opened her eyes. No. The high priest studied her carefully. Then what does he do? A tremor pulsed through her bones. The faintest warmth settled at the base of her ribs. "He protects me." The words fell into silence. The chamber responded with another violent quake. Above them, faint cracks spidered across the ceiling. Dust rained down. The high priest's composure fractured again. "He is manipulating you." "Is he?" The sigil flared brighter, not in chaos, in reaction. Far below, Valor felt the pressure intensifying. The priests were forcing energy downward, reinforcing the seal, strengthening chains. He pressed his palm against the barrier. The fracture widened another inch. Their touch had changed everything. He could feel her now. Not distant, not separate, linked. The connection pulsed between them like a heartbeat. They were no longer divided by silence. They were divided by structure, and structure could break. "Back in the vault." The high priest stepped inside the circle. The guards hesitated. "You risk collapse," one warned. He ignored them. He stood directly before Elira. "If you refuse the ritual," he said calmly, "this temple will fall." "If I accept it," she replied, "I die." "You were raised for sacrifice, and he was raised for ruin." The words struck harder than she expected. The high priest stared at her. "You think him a victim." "I think him honest." The sigil beneath them cracked audibly. A jagged line split across its surface. Gasps echoed in the chamber. The high priest stepped back immediately. "Seal the outer doors," he ordered sharply. "Now!" The guards rushed upward. The chamber darkened. Torches flickered erratically. Elira stood alone within the cracked sigil. The warmth in her veins deepened. Valor's voice brushed her mind. "They are afraid. So are you." A pause. "Yes." Another tremor surged violently. A chunk of stone fell from the ceiling. The seal was destabilizing faster than anyone expected. "What happens if it breaks fully?" she whispered. His answer came without hesitation. "Everything changes. Not destruction, not apocalypse. Change. The difference mattered." Footsteps thundered again above. The high priest returned to the edge of the circle. His face was pale now, not with age, with realization. "You are no longer merely compatible," he said quietly. "You are resonant." The word echoed strangely. "What does that mean?" she asked. He looked at the cracking sigil. "It means if he rises." His gaze returned to her glowing wrist. "He will rise through you." Silence swallowed the chamber. The connection between her and Valor pulsed violently in response. Not possession, not control. Fusion. The idea terrified her and thrilled her. The tremor that followed was the strongest yet. The entire vault shook. Above them, distant screams echoed. The temple was feeling it now. The kingdom would feel it soon. The high priest whispered a final command. "Prepare the ritual early." Elira's heart stopped. They would not wait. They would sacrifice her before the seal failed entirely. Deep below, Valor felt the decision. His shadow darkened. The fracture burned brighter, and for the first time, he began to push back. The bells did not ring at dawn. They rang at midnight. Low, urgent, wrong. Elira was taken from her chamber before the sun ever rose. No ceremony, no procession, no hymns, only torches and tightened jaws. The high priest walked ahead of her in silence. He no longer tried to persuade. He no longer pretended this was sacred. It was necessary, and necessity had no softness. The temple corridors felt different now, shorter, colder, as if the stone itself were impatient. Every tremor beneath her feet was stronger than the last. Velor was pushing, not violently, but steadily, testing the boundaries, feeling for weakness. She felt it too. The resonance between them had grown undeniable, not a whisper, not a pull, a current, and it ran both ways. They brought her again to the lower vault. But this time, the sigil in the floor had been altered. New runes had been carved hastily around its edges. Fresh chalk, fresh blood. The scent lingered in the air. The ritual was not scheduled for tonight. It was meant to occur weeks from now. But fear accelerates devotion. The high priest turned to face her. "You leave us no choice." Elira met his eyes. "You always had a choice." The words unsettled him. She stepped into the circle willingly. That unsettled him more. Chains were brought forward, thin bands of silver etched with scripture. They wrapped around her wrists, not tightly, but symbolically, as if symbolism could still contain what had begun. The high priest lifted the ceremonial blade. For the first time, Elira did not look at it. She closed her eyes instead and reached downward. Velor. The response was immediate. The fracture flared violently. The entire vault shook. Dust fell like ash. "They begin," Velor said within her mind. "Yes." A pause. "Are you afraid?" She considered. "Yes, so am I." Honesty again. No godly pretense, no divine arrogance, just truth. The high priest began the chant. It was older than the temple, older than the kingdom. Each syllable struck the air like a hammer against glass. The sigil ignited beneath her feet. Light climbed up her body in thin lines. The mark on her wrist burned white-hot. Pain lanced through her veins. But beneath it, something else. Strength. Velor pressed his palm against the fracture. The barrier thinned. Energy surged violently between them. The ritual was supposed to suppress. Instead, it amplified. The high priest faltered mid-chant. He felt it too. "She is not weakening," a guard whispered. "She is stabilizing him." "No," another said, voice trembling. "They are stabilizing each other." The words froze the chamber. The blade descended toward her palm and shattered before it touched her skin. A shockwave exploded outward. Torches extinguished instantly. The silver chains snapped like threads. The sigil cracked in a jagged line across its center. The high priest stumbled backward. Above them, stone screamed. Velor's voice filled the chamber now, not whispering, resonating. "You bind what you do not understand." The guards dropped to their knees instinctively, not in prayer, in terror. The fracture between worlds widened visibly in the air above the circle, not fully open, but bleeding light. Elira stood at its center, unburned, unbroken. Her eyes lifted slowly, not toward the high priest, toward the fracture, toward him. The high priest's voice trembled for the first time in his life. "Close it!" The priests scrambled to reinforce the runes, but every attempt fizzled. Every sigil they traced collapsed. The connection between Elira and Velor had changed the equation. This was no longer sacrifice and prison. It was alignment. The fracture pulsed violently again. For a single breath, the barrier dissolved completely. Velor stepped through, not fully, not entirely freed, but present. His boots touched the sigil floor. The chamber froze. He stood tall, scarred, ancient, real. The air thickened around him like storm pressure before lightning. No flames erupted, no wings unfolded, no monstrous transformation, only presence, terrifying in its restraint. The high priest could not breathe. "You were never our god," he whispered. Velor's gaze shifted to him slowly. "I never asked to be." The simplicity of it struck harder than wrath. The barrier snapped back into place violently. Velor's form dissolved backward into shadow. The fracture sealed partially, but not fully. It would never return to what it was. The chamber fell silent except for falling debris. Elira remained standing in the center. The sigil beneath her feet was no longer intact. It had split directly down the middle. The high priest stared at her, not with authority, with dread. "You have doomed us," he whispered. Elira lifted her glowing wrist. "No," her voice was steady. "We have begun something. Above them, across the temple, across the kingdom." Cracks began to appear in the marble foundations, not collapsing, spreading. Change had begun, and it would not be undone. The first crack appeared in silence, not in the vault, not in the ritual chamber, not beneath the temple floor where priests expected disaster to begin. It appeared in the eastern corridor, a thin white line across polished marble, so narrow it might have been dismissed as age if it had not moved. A novice saw it first. He froze mid-step, watched the line stretch another inch across the stone, then another and another. By the time he screamed, the bells began ringing again, not by human hands. Across the temple, doors opened. Priests rushed into corridors still trembling with the echo of the midnight ritual. Torches flickered without wind. Scripture chains rattled along the walls. Incense burners tipped without being touched. And beneath everything, the stone itself breathed. In the lower vault, the high priest stood unmoving before the broken sigil. He did not shout. He did not pray. He did not move, because he understood something the others did not yet see. The seal had not weakened. It had changed. "Elira," he said quietly. She remained standing at the center of the fractured circle, her wrist still glowing faintly. The light did not pulse anymore. It flowed, like something alive beneath her skin. "You felt it," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she answered. And so did he. The words settled heavily between them, not accusation, recognition. Above them, the bells continued ringing. Across the city, across every tower, across every shrine. Not together, not orderly, but one after another, as if something beneath the earth were striking them from below. In the northern quarter of the capital, a baker dropped his lantern. The flame went out before it touched the ground. The oven stones split along their seams. Flour scattered across the floor like falling ash. And somewhere beneath his feet, something moved. In the royal barracks, soldiers woke at once, not to noise, not to command, to pressure. The air itself had thickened. Armor creaked against stone racks without being touched. One of them whispered, "Did you feel that?" No one answered, because they all had. Back inside the temple vault, the high priest finally turned toward his guards. "Seal the outer gates." "They already are," one replied. "No," he said. "Seal the city gates." Silence followed. No one moved. Then one guard spoke carefully. "Your Eminence, that authority belongs to the crown." "Not tonight," the high priest said. Elira watched him closely. For the first time, he was afraid of something beyond the ritual, beyond her, beyond the chamber. "What changed?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked upward, as if he could see through layers of stone and marble into the streets above. "Witnesses," he said at last. Deep below the temple, Valor stood before the fracture again. The barrier was thinner now, not weak, not broken, transparent. For the first time in centuries, he could see movement beyond Elira's presence. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. Voices, steps, fear. The world was beginning to look back. "Elira," he said. She felt him instantly, not as a whisper, not as a call, as proximity. "I feel them," she answered. "Yes. They feel you too." In the council chamber of the palace, the king had not yet risen from sleep when the first messenger arrived. He entered without ceremony, without permission, without breath. "My lord," the words failed him. The king sat upright slowly. "What is it?" "The temple bells. They ring every night. Not like this." Before the king could answer, another messenger entered, then another, each carrying fragments of the same report, cracks in marble roads, shrines trembling without cause, statues splitting at the base, animals refusing to cross certain streets, and everywhere, light, faint, hair thin, spreading beneath the stone. The king stood. "Bring me the high priest." "He's already coming," a guard said quietly. Back in the vault, the high priest turned once more toward Elira. "You must come with me." "I already did." "This time," he said, "you will not return." The words did not sound cruel. They sounded inevitable. Above them, something shifted. Not a tremor, not a collapse, a resonance. The same vibration Elira had felt in the fracture chamber, but wider now, deeper, shared. Valor felt it too, and for the first time, he stepped forward without hesitation. His hand touched the barrier again. This time, it did not resist him immediately. Light spread outward from his fingers like frost across glass. The fracture widened another inch. In the temple corridors above, priests stopped mid-prayer. Every rune etched into the walls dimmed at once, then flared again, but differently, not sealing, responding. "He is moving," one whispered. "No," another answered. "He is being answered." Elira turned sharply. "You did that." "No," Valor said. "You did." The high priest heard her speak, but not to him. He followed her gaze instinctively toward the invisible line between worlds. For a moment, he saw it, not clearly, not fully, but enough to understand the danger had changed shape. "He is closer," he said. "Yes, and so are you." Across the city, the cracks continued spreading, not destroying, not collapsing, connecting, stone to stone, street to temple, temple to palace, palace to vault, as if something beneath the kingdom were drawing a map. In the royal chamber, the king finally spoke the words no ruler wished to say. "Prepare the guard." "For war?" his general asked. "No, for revelation. Back beneath the temple, Elira stepped once more into the broken circle. No chains remained, no blade, no chant, only the mark on her wrist and the widening fracture before her. "They are going to stop us," she said. "Yes, they will try to kill me. Yes." She did not look away from the light. "And you?" Velor answered without hesitation. "I am already trying not to break the world." Above them, across the temple, across the capital, the cracks continued spreading, slowly, patiently, inevitably. And for the first time since the seal was forged, the kingdom understood something had begun that could not be undone. The king did not wait for sunrise. He went to the temple himself. No procession, no banners, no heralds. Only 6 guards and a single torch carried ahead of him through streets that should have been sleeping. But the city was awake, not loudly, not openly. Watching, doors half opened, windows unlatched just enough for eyes to follow him. Everywhere he passed, people stood barefoot in silence, because the marble beneath the capital had begun to change, and everyone could feel it. The temple gates did not open quickly enough. The high priest was already waiting inside. He did not bow deeply. The king noticed. "You felt it," the king said. "Yes." "Then tell me what has begun." The high priest hesitated. For the first time in 20 years. He did not answer immediately. "It is not beginning," he said at last. "It is returning." The word lingered between them. Returning. Not rebellion. Not collapse. Not disaster. Return. The king's jaw tightened. "Bring me the girl." Below them, far beneath the temple floor, Elira felt the command before anyone spoke it aloud. "They're coming," she said. "Yes," Velor answered. "They always do." The lower vault doors opened with a sound like something ancient waking. The king entered slowly, not with fear, not with anger, with recognition. He stopped when he saw her wrist. The broken circle burned brighter in his presence, not violently, not defensively, as if acknowledging him. "So," he said quietly, "it is you." Elira did not bow. The high priest noticed. The guards noticed. The king noticed. But he did not correct her. "How long?" he asked. "Since the ritual failed," the high priest replied. "It did not fail," the king said. "No," Elira answered softly. "It changed." The king looked at her carefully, not as a ruler looks at a subject, as a witness looks at a prophecy he hoped never to meet. "I was told this would happen once," he said. "Only once." The high priest stiffened. "My lord, you never told me," the king continued calmly, "that it had happened before." Silence fell across the vault. The guards shifted uneasily. Even the stones seemed to pause. Elira spoke first. "It has?" The king nodded slowly. "Yes." He stepped closer, not toward the sigil, toward her. "When I was a child," he said, "I was shown a record sealed beneath the palace. No one else reads it. No priest, no scholar, only the crown." The high priest's voice sharpened. "That record is symbolic." No, the king replied. It is historical. He turned toward the broken circle on the floor. It describes a night when the seal did not hold. The chamber trembled faintly, not from Valor, from memory. There was another, the king said, another bearer of the mark. Another silence followed. Elira did not move. Valor did. Far below the fracture, he stepped closer. What happened to her? Elira asked. The king did not answer immediately, because the truth was heavier than the ritual itself. She disappeared, he said. The high priest spoke quickly. She was purified. No, the king said again. She vanished. The chamber darkened slightly, not from shadow, from attention. Valor was listening now, not as an echo, as a presence. The record ends there, the king continued. No explanation, no burial, no replacement ritual, only a warning. Elira's voice was steady. What warning? The king looked directly at her wrist. If the marked one survives contact, he said slowly, the seal will choose a side. The word struck the chamber like falling stone. The high priest stepped backward. That text is forbidden interpretation. It is preserved instruction, the king replied. Below them, the fracture widened another fraction. Valor felt it. So did Elira. Not pain, alignment. What side? She asked. The king answered without hesitation. Yours. The high priest's voice rose for the first time. This is exactly why the ritual must be completed immediately. No, the king said. This is exactly why it must not. The guards looked between them. Two authorities. One kingdom. No agreement. Elira, the king said quietly. Have you seen him? Yes. Clearly? Yes. Does he command you? No. Does he threaten you? No. The king nodded once, then spoke the question no priest had dared ask. Does he trust you? Deep beneath the vault, Valor answered before she could. Yes. The word echoed through her chest like a second heartbeat. She did not repeat it aloud. She did not need to. The king saw it in her face. He has crossed the threshold once already, the king said. The high priest froze. My lord, I felt it, the king continued. So did the palace. So did the city. So did the roads beneath our walls. The chamber trembled again, stronger this time. Closer, not from below, from everywhere. The seal is no longer local, the king said. It is structural. Elira understood immediately. The kingdom is part of it, yes. Far below the fracture, Valor placed his hand against the barrier again. This time, it did not resist at all. In the vault, the air shifted, not violently, not dangerously, inevitably. He is coming closer, the king whispered. No, Elira answered. We are. Above them, across the capital, across the marble foundations of the royal palace itself, the cracks continued spreading. Not randomly, not destructively, deliberately, toward something, toward someone. The king turned slowly toward the high priest. For centuries, he said, you believed the ritual preserved the kingdom. Yes, it did not. Another tremor moved through the vault floor, this one deeper, older, recognizable. It postponed this moment, the king finished. Elira lifted her glowing wrist again. The light no longer flickered. It answered. Then what happens now? She asked. The king looked at the fracture, at the sigil, at the girl, at the future he had hoped never to see. Now, he said, the kingdom must decide whether it fears him. His eyes shifted toward her wrist. Or needs him. Far beneath the temple, Valor stepped forward again, and this time, something stepped back. It was a child. The first person to see him was not a priest, not a king, not a soldier. She stood barefoot in the northern courtyard beside the fountain where the marble had begun to split days earlier. At first she thought the light beneath the stone was sunrise, but the sun had not risen yet. The glow moved, not upward, sideways, as if something beneath the city were walking. She did not scream. She reached toward it, and for a moment, the light answered. By the time her mother found her, the cracks had spread across the entire square. Thin, white, silent, but no longer hidden. Word traveled faster than bells, faster than messengers, faster than command. By morning, everyone in the capital had seen something. A shifting shadow beneath marble streets, a pulse in shrine floors, a statue that turned its face overnight toward the eastern temple without being touched. And everywhere, light beneath stone. Inside the palace council chamber, arguments had already begun. "This is panic," one minister insisted. "This is evidence," another answered. "This is sabotage," said a general. "This is prophecy," whispered someone older. The king said nothing, because he had already chosen which word it was. Below the temple, Elira felt the city awaken, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Thousands of footsteps, thousands of voices, thousands of fears moving through stone like weather. "They can feel him now," she said. "Yes," Valor answered. "They always could." "But not like this," she replied. "No," he agreed, "not like this." The high priest had not slept. He stood before the broken sigil with 3 senior archivists and a table of forbidden texts opened across the stone floor. Pages older than the kingdom itself. Pages no initiate had ever seen. Pages that described nights like this one. "It is accelerating," one archivist whispered. "It is synchronizing," another corrected. "It is repeating," said the third. The high priest closed the book. "No," he said quietly, "it is completing." Above them, the city gates did not open at dawn. No official order had been given, but the guards refused to move them because the cracks had reached the hinges. Caravans waited outside the walls. Merchants argued. Messengers shouted. No one entered. No one left. The capital had sealed itself without command. In the southern quarter, an old historian opened a chest he had not touched in 40 years. Inside lay a fragment of carved stone wrapped in cloth, broken from the temple floor during a restoration decades earlier. He had never understood why he kept it, until now. The fragment began to glow in his hands. He dropped it immediately, then whispered a name he had not spoken since childhood. Valor. Back in the vault, Elira felt it. Someone else had recognized him. Someone else had remembered. "You felt that?" she said. "Yes." "Who was it?" "Someone who listened when the others stopped." The king entered the chamber again before the high priest could summon him. This time, he did not arrive alone. Behind him walked scholars, architects, cartographers, not soldiers, observers. "We are mapping the fractures," the king said simply. The high priest stared at him. "This is not a structure to measure." "Yes," The king answered, "It is." He unrolled a parchment across the broken sigil, lines drawn overnight across the capital, every street marked, every temple floor recorded, every marble foundation traced, and through the center of it, one pattern, not random, not spreading outward, converging. Toward the palace, the high priest whispered. "No," the king corrected, "toward her." Elira did not move, but the light on her wrist brightened, not in response to fear, recognition. Valor stepped closer to the fracture again. This time, the barrier did not blur his shape. It clarified it. Elira could see the scar across his jaw more clearly than before, the lines across his hands, the stillness in his shoulders, the restraint, always restraint. "They are beginning to understand," he said. "Yes. And you?" "I'm beginning to remember," he answered. The words unsettled her. Remember what? But he did not answer yet, because something else had begun. Across the city, people stopped speaking mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-breath, not from fear, from resonance. The same vibration passed through every street at once, every courtyard, every wall, every tower. In the palace observatory, glass instruments shattered without sound, not violently, quietly, as if something had passed through them. In the temple archives, ink lifted from pages without wind, ancient symbols rewriting themselves across margins long thought blank. In the lower vault, the fracture widened again, not by force, by permission. "Elira," Valor said softly. "Yes, the city is no longer holding the seal." She understood immediately. "It's holding you." Above them, the historian in the southern quarter returned to the glowing stone fragment. This time he did not drop it. This time he carried it outside, into the street, into the light, and when he placed it against the cracked marble road, the fracture aligned perfectly with its edge, as if the stone had been waiting to return. He began to laugh, not wildly, not madly, with relief. "They hid him," he whispered. "They didn't seal him." Back beneath the temple, the high priest heard the words through a messenger minutes later, and for the first time, he sat down, not in authority, in realization. The king turned toward Elira again. "How many more can see him now?" She closed her eyes briefly, felt the fractures, the memory, the presence beneath everything. "More than yesterday," she answered. Valor stepped forward once more, closer than he had ever been. So close now. The air between them no longer shimmered. It breathed. "Soon," he said quietly, "I will not need the fracture." Above them, across the capital, across the marble foundations of the kingdom itself, the cracks stopped spreading. Not because they had ended, because they had arrived. The first refusal did not come from the palace. It did not come from the temple. It came from the archivists. 3 of them stood in the lower corridor outside the forbidden vault, hands still ink-stained from the oldest texts ever opened beneath the sanctuary. They did not whisper. They did not argue. They simply stopped copying the ritual sequence, and that alone changed everything. The high priest noticed immediately. "Continue," he said. They did not move. "You misunderstand," he repeated. "No," one of them answered quietly. "For the first time, we understand exactly." Silence spread through the corridor. Not resistance, recognition. "This ritual," the archivist continued, "was never meant to repeat forever." The high priest's voice hardened. "It preserved the kingdom." "No," she said. "It preserved the delay." Below them, far beneath the temple floor, Velor felt the shift. Not in stone, not in the fracture, in belief. Something inside the structure of the seal loosened. "Elira," he said softly. "Yes, they are beginning to read correctly." Above the sanctuary level, priests gathered in private chambers normally reserved for council oaths. But this time, they spoke without consensus, without hierarchy, without certainty. He crossed the barrier. He touched the sigil floor. He spoke inside the vault. He stood inside the circle. Each sentence made the next one easier to say, until someone finally spoke the forbidden conclusion aloud. "He is not contained anymore." The room went still. No one corrected him. Across the city, rumors had already outrun doctrine. Market vendors whispered of light beneath the roads. Children drew circles in dust that glowed faintly after sunset. Animals refused to enter shrine courtyards. And the oldest citizens, those who remembered stories their grandparents had hidden, began telling them again. They sealed him because they feared him. "No," another corrected. "They sealed him because they used him." Inside the palace, the king stood before the same sealed record chamber he had opened as a boy. This time, he did not hesitate. This time, he brought witnesses. The doors opened slowly. Stone grinding against stone older than the kingdom itself. Inside, there were no relics, no weapons, no divine instructions, only testimony, names, dates, disappearances, and one symbol repeated across every page, the broken circle. "Not sacrifices," one scholar whispered, "successors." The king did not speak, because he already knew what they were reading. Below the temple, Elira felt the moment the palace archive opened, not as sound, not as vision, as certainty. "They're learning," she said. "Yes," Velor answered. "They always do, eventually. But too late? No. Too slowly? No." He paused. "This time, differently." The fracture widened again, not dramatically, not violently, but enough that she could see more of him than shadow, more than outline, more than presence. "You're clearer," she said. "So are you." Above them, the high priest entered the inner council chamber alone. For the first time in decades, he dismissed the attendants, closed the doors himself, and knelt, not in prayer, in calculation. "If the ritual fails completely," he said aloud to the empty room, "the structure collapses." Behind him, a voice answered, "No." He turned sharply. The king stood in the doorway, unannounced, uninvited, unavoidable. "The structure changes," the king continued. The high priest rose slowly. "You opened the archive. Yes. You should not have. I should have done it sooner." They stood facing each other across centuries of agreement now dissolving in silence. "She is not a sacrifice," the king said. "She never was." The high priest's expression did not change. "She is the seal." "No," the king answered. "She is the hinge." Below them, the fracture pulsed once, strong enough to shake dust from the vault ceiling. Elira stepped closer instinctively. "So that's what I am," she whispered. Velor did not answer immediately, because he was listening upward, listening outward, listening beyond the temple entirely. "They are dividing," he said at last. "Across the priesthood, Lines were forming. Quietly, irreversibly. Some continued preparing the ritual. Others began closing the ritual chambers. Others still simply stopped speaking the chant at all. Faith had not collapsed. It had split. In the southern district, the historian who carried the glowing stone fragments stood before a gathering crowd now larger than any sermon had drawn in years. They called him Ruin, he said. But ruin for whom? No one answered, because for the first time, they were asking the question seriously. Inside the vault, Elira turned toward the fracture again. "If they stop the ritual," she asked, "what happens?" Velor stepped forward, closer than before. Closer than yesterday, closer than the barrier should allow. "Then the seal chooses," he said. "And if they don't?" His gaze did not shift. "Then you do." Above them, across the capital, priests argued. Citizens gathered. Archives opened. Symbols rewrote themselves in stone. And the fracture between worlds widened quietly. Not breaking, not closing, waiting for someone to decide what it had always been meant to become. The first name returned at dawn, not spoken in the temple, not recorded in the palace, spoken in the streets. An old woman in the southern quarter stopped beside a cracked shrine wall, where the marble had shifted just enough to expose a buried inscription. She brushed the dust away with trembling fingers, read the letters slowly, carefully, as if afraid they might disappear again. "Elira," she whispered. The name moved through the city faster than rumor, faster than doctrine, faster than correction, because names carry memory, and memory survives where scripture fails. Inside the temple archives, 3 scribes stopped writing at once. They had never seen the name before, yet all 3 recognized it immediately, not as history, as omission. The high priest did not, because he had never been allowed to. "The streets are speaking a false name," one attendant reported. "No," another corrected quietly. "They are speaking a missing one." Below the temple, Elira felt the name before she heard it. Not as sound, as recognition. Something inside the mark on her wrist responded, not burning, opening. "Velor," she said. "Yes." They found her. He did not ask which name she meant, because he already knew. "She did not vanish," he said. "She crossed." The words settled heavily between them. Crossed. Not sacrificed. Not lost. Not purified. Crossed. Above them. The king stood inside the palace archive chamber again. This time, with every sealed volume open, every forbidden ledger unrolled, every erased margin exposed to light. "There is a second record," a scholar whispered, hidden beneath the binding of a ceremonial treaty, pressed flat for centuries, deliberately concealed. The king read it aloud himself, because some truths must be spoken by rulers or not at all. The bearer survived contact. Silence followed. The ritual failed to terminate alignment. Another silence. The subject passed through the fracture. The king closed the page slowly. "They buried her name," he said, "because she proved the ritual was never permanent." In the temple council chamber, the high priest heard the report moments later, and for the first time in his life. He struck the table with his hand. "That record is incomplete." "No," the messenger answered. "It is intact." The high priest did not respond immediately, because he understood what intact meant. It meant deliberate concealment. It meant inheritance without consent. It meant continuity without truth. She crossed, he repeated quietly. Below the vault, Elira turned toward the fracture again. What happened to her? Valor stepped closer, closer than he had ever stood before, so close now the air between them no longer shimmered. It parted. She chose, he said. The answer unsettled her more than any warning had. Chose what? He lifted his hand again, not toward the barrier, toward her. To stop standing where you are standing now. Above them, across the capital, the cracks in the marble foundations stopped spreading outward. Instead, they began moving downward, toward the deeper layers of the city, toward older stone, toward older architecture buried beneath the kingdom itself. They are aligning, one architect whispered inside the palace mapping chamber. With what? No one answered, because no one wanted to say it aloud. With the original boundary, in the southern district, the historian who first spoke the buried name now stood before a crowd twice the size of yesterday's. They erased her, he said, because she survived. And if this one survives? Someone asked. He did not answer immediately, because everyone already knew the question was not theoretical anymore. Inside the temple, half the priesthood had stopped chanting entirely, not in rebellion, in uncertainty. The high priest stood alone before the ritual circle again, broken, split, changed. If she crosses, he whispered to the empty chamber, the seal will never close again. Behind him, the king answered quietly. It was never meant to. Below them. Elira stepped closer to the fracture than she ever had before. So close now. She could see not just Valor's scars, not just his outline, his breath. You remember her? She said. Yes. Did she trust you? The question lingered longer than any before it, because some truths take longer to cross the barrier than others. Yes, he said finally. Did you trust her? Another pause, shorter this time, stronger. Yes. The fracture widened again, not violently, not dangerously, naturally. Above them, across the temple, across the palace, across the capital itself, the buried names spread through the streets like returning weather. Althira, Althira, Althira. And for the first time in centuries, the kingdom understood something had already happened once before, which meant it could happen again. The first stone fell without sound. No collapse, no fracture, no warning, just absence. A block of marble beneath the western road vanished as if it had never existed. The ground did not sink. It revealed. A child walking beside her father stepped forward into the exposed space and stopped. Not because she was afraid, because something inside the opening was glowing. Not brightly, not violently, patiently. Within minutes, the street was empty. Within an hour, the city was not. The guards arrived first, then priests, then scholars, then citizens who refused to leave. Because what lay beneath the marble was not ruin. It was architecture, older architecture, a stairway. Inside the palace mapping chamber, every instrument stopped moving at once. Ink froze mid-line. Rulers slipped from hands. Threads stretched across city diagrams tightened without touch. It's not a fracture, one architect whispered. It's alignment. Below the temple, Elira felt the moment the stairway opened. Not as sound, not as movement, as invitation. Valor, she said. Yes, they found something. I know. His voice did not carry surprise, It carried recognition. "They weren't supposed to find it yet," he said. The word yet echoed longer than she expected. "What is it?" He stepped closer to the fracture, closer than ever before, close enough now that the boundary between them looked less like glass and more like memory. "It's the first gate," he said. Above them, the king stood at the edge of the exposed stairway before anyone else dared descend. Not because he was fearless, because he understood delay was more dangerous than descent. "How deep?" he asked. "No bottom visible," a guard answered. "How old?" "Older than the temple." The high priest arrived seconds later. He stopped when he saw the stonework. Not cracked, not damaged, not broken. Carved, deliberately hidden. "This should not exist," he whispered. The king answered without looking at him. "It always existed." They descended together, not as allies, not as enemies, as witnesses. The stairway curved downward through layers of stone no map had ever recorded, no scripture had mentioned, no ritual had acknowledged, until they reached the door. It was not sealed, it was waiting. Symbols covered its surface, not priestly script, not royal markings, something older, something simpler, something unmistakable, a broken circle, inside the vault below the temple. Elira stepped forward instinctively. Her wrist burned again, not painfully, responding. "They opened it," she said. "Yes," Valor answered. "They weren't supposed to. Neither were you." Above them, the king placed his hand against the ancient door. The stone warmed beneath his palm, not rejecting him, recognizing him. "Open it," he said. The high priest hesitated. "For centuries we kept this buried." "For centuries," the king answered, "we kept the truth buried." The door opened without force, without sound, without resistance. Inside, there was no chamber. There was space, not carved, not built, left. At the center stood a ring of stone pillars arranged in a perfect circle, each carved with a single symbol, each identical to the mark on Elira's wrist. "This is not a prison," the king whispered. "No," the high priest answered. "It's a threshold." Below the temple, the fracture widened again. Not suddenly, not violently, inevitably. Elira stepped closer. "So that's what the seal was hiding." "Yes," Valor said. "The exit." Above them, the pillars began to glow, one after another, not responding to priests, not responding to soldiers, responding to presence. "Who built this?" a guard whispered. The king did not answer, because he already knew the truth was older than kings. Below, Valor placed his hand against the boundary again. This time, the fracture did not resist at all. Elira could see him clearly now. Not shadow, not outline. Him, standing only a breath away. "They built it before they called me ruin," he said. Above them, the final pillar ignited. The circle completed itself. The ground beneath the chamber shifted, not collapsing, unlocking. The high priest stepped backward. This was never part of the ritual. "No," the king answered quietly. "It was part of the beginning. Below the temple." Elira lifted her glowing wrist again. The mark answered the circle beneath the kingdom instantly. The fracture widened another inch. "Valor," she whispered. "Yes, if this opens." He did not hesitate. Then the kingdom stops pretending it knows where its foundations end. Above them, inside the hidden chamber beneath the Capitol, the circle of pillars began to turn, slowly, precisely, inevitably, and for the first time since the seal was forged, the gate beneath the kingdom began to open. pillars did not move quickly. They moved deliberately. Each rotation was slow enough to watch and too slow to ignore. At first, no one spoke. Not the guards, not the priests, not even the king, because the sound they made was wrong. Not grinding, not cracking, not mechanical, alive. Stone should not breathe. Stone should not respond. Stone should not remember. And yet, the pillars turned. The broken circle symbols carved across their surfaces began aligning one by one, not randomly, not sequentially, purposefully, as if responding to something beneath them. "Stop it," the high priest said. No one moved, because no one was touching them. "Stop it," he repeated louder. Still nothing changed. The king stepped forward instead. "How many pillars?" he asked. 12, a guard answered. "How many ritual sequences exist?" 12. The high priest turned sharply. "That is coincidence." "No," the king said. "That is design." Below the temple, Elira felt the first pillar lock into place, not as sound, as certainty. "They're opening the gate," she said. "Yes," Velor answered. The fracture widened again. Not dramatically, not dangerously, naturally. "Were they always meant to?" she asked. "Yes." "Then why seal it?" He did not answer immediately, because some truths require timing. "To delay the choice," he said at last. Above them, the second pillar locked, then the third, then the fourth. Each alignment sent a ripple through the chamber beneath the kingdom. Each ripple echoed through the temple vault above. Each echo reached Elira like a second heartbeat. The high priest stepped into the circle. "Do not continue this." No one was continuing anything. The pillars continued themselves. "You are dismantling the seal," he said. "No," the king answered quietly. "We are revealing it." The fifth pillar turned, then the sixth, half the circle complete. Across the capital, the marble fractures began glowing brighter, not spreading anymore, connecting, street to street, wall to wall, foundation to foundation, a network, a pattern, a map no architect had drawn. Inside the palace archive chamber, scholars unrolled the oldest surviving foundation plans of the kingdom. They did not match the city above them. They matched the circle below. "This was never a temple city," one whispered. "It was a gate complex." Below, Elira stepped closer to the fracture again. So close now she could see the light reflecting in Velor's eyes. "You knew," she said. "Yes." "You waited." "Yes." "For me?" He paused, only briefly. For someone who would survive the contact. Above them, the seventh pillar turned, then the eighth. The chamber floor shifted again, not downward, outward, as if space itself were widening. The guards backed away instinctively. The high priest did not, because retreat now would mean recognition, and recognition meant surrender. "This was never meant to open," he said. The king answered without looking at him. "It was never meant to stay closed." Below the temple, the fracture widened another inch. The boundary between Elira and Velor no longer shimmered. It thinned, like fog dissolving in sunlight. "What happens when all 12 align?" she asked. Velor stepped closer, closer than he had ever stood before. "Then the seal stops being a wall," he said, "and becomes a passage." Above them, the ninth pillar locked into place, then the 10th. Only 2 remained. The chamber beneath the kingdom began to glow, not from torches, not from runes, from the symbols themselves. Each broken circle answered the mark on Elira's wrist across layers of stone, across distance, across time. The high priest felt it, for the first time, not as threat, as confirmation. "She is not the seal," he whispered. "No," the king answered. "She never was." Below, Elira lifted her hand toward the fracture, not touching it, not crossing it, recognizing it. "You're closer," she said. "So are you," Velor answered. Above them, the 11th pillar turned, locked, aligned. Only one remained. The chamber fell silent, not calm, waiting. The final pillar did not move. Not immediately, not automatically. The king looked around the circle, then toward the temple above, then toward the vault beneath, then finally toward Elira, though she was not physically there. "It's waiting," he said. "For what?" the high priest asked. "For her, below the temple." Elira felt the truth of it instantly, not instruction, invitation. "Velor," she whispered. "Yes. If I step forward..." The fracture brightened, not violently, not dangerously. "It will answer," he said. Above them, the final pillar began to turn, slowly, inevitably, irreversibly, across the capital. Every fracture beneath the marble streets lit at once. Every shrine floor answered. Every foundation shifted. Every citizen felt it. The gate beneath the kingdom was no longer hidden, no longer theoretical, no longer delayed. It was opening. The final pillar did not finish turning on its own. It waited. The chamber beneath the kingdom held its breath. The priests stopped chanting. The guards stopped moving. Even the king did not speak, because everyone understood. The mechanism had reached its limit, and something else had to continue it. Below the temple, Elira felt the stillness arrive before anyone above did. Not silence, expectation. The fracture before her no longer flickered. It remained open, not wide, not narrow, possible. "It's waiting," she said. "Yes," Velor answered. "For what?" "For you." The words did not feel like command. They felt like recognition, as if the gate beneath the kingdom had always known her name. Above them, inside the hidden circle chamber, the final pillar trembled once, then stopped again, unresolved, incomplete. The high priest stepped backward. "No," he said quietly. "No further." The king did not answer him, because authority had already shifted elsewhere. "Elira," Velor said softly. "Yes, if you step forward now." He did not finish the sentence, because she already understood. The fracture widened slightly, just enough for light to pass between them without resistance, just enough for distance to stop pretending it mattered. "What happened to Althira?" she asked. Velor did not hesitate this time. "She stepped where you are standing." "And then?" "She refused to step back." The answer settled into the chamber like gravity. Not tragic, not triumphant. Final. Above them, the king placed his hand on the last pillar. It warmed beneath his touch, but it did not move. "It will not answer me," he said. "No," the high priest whispered. "It never was meant to." Below, Elira lifted her glowing wrist again. The broken circle shone brighter than before, not burning, guiding. "They built this for her," she said. "Yes." "And for me?" "Yes." The fracture between worlds responded immediately, not widening, aligning. For the first time, the boundary between them matched the circle beneath the kingdom exactly. Not barrier, not prison. Structure. "If I step forward," she said carefully, "what happens to the seal?" Velor stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the movement of breath across his shoulders. "It stops pretending it was ever meant to hold me," he said. Above them, the final pillar shifted. 1 inch, then stopped again, waiting. The high priest raised his voice for the first time in hours. "Do not move." Elira did not look at him, because he was no longer speaking to her. He was speaking to history. "You will end everything this kingdom was built to protect." The king answered before she could. "No." He stepped into the circle fully now, into the center of the ancient structure, into the place no ruler had stood in centuries. She will begin what it was built to become. The final pillar trembled again. Below. Elira lifted her hand toward the fracture, not touching it, not crossing yet, understanding it. "I can feel the city," she whispered. "Yes?" "I can feel the gate. Yes. I can feel him." Velor did not answer immediately, because the last truth mattered more than the others. "And he can feel you," he said, across the capital. Every fracture beneath the marble streets brightened at once. Not spreading, not growing, completing. Inside the hidden chamber, the final pillar began turning again, slowly, reluctantly, as if recognizing something irreversible had already begun. The high priest closed his eyes, not in prayer, in acceptance. "Elira," he said quietly, "if you cross this threshold, there will be no ritual left to contain him." She finally turned toward him, not as a sacrifice, not as a symbol, as a decision. "There never was," she said. Below the temple, the fracture opened wider than it ever had before, not violently, not dangerously, welcoming. Velor stepped forward at the same moment she did, not through the barrier, toward its center, toward the place where distance stopped existing. Above them, the final pillar locked into alignment. The circle completed itself. The chamber beneath the kingdom ignited with light. Across the capital, every foundation answered, every shrine trembled, every street shifted, not collapsing, changing. And for the first time since the seal was forged, someone stepped forward instead of stepping back. The light did not explode outward. It settled. Across the hidden chamber beneath the kingdom, the completed circle glowed with a steadiness no ritual had ever achieved before. Not unstable, not violent, resolved. The final pillar locked into silence, and for the first time in centuries, nothing trembled. Above the chamber, across the capital, the fractures beneath the marble streets stopped moving entirely. No spreading, no widening, no cracking stone, only stillness, the kind that arrives after something irreversible has already happened. Inside the circle chamber, the king lowered his hand slowly from the final pillar. The high priest remained motionless beside him. Neither spoke, because both men understood the same terrible truth. The seal had not failed. It had completed something. Below the temple, Elira stood before the fracture, but the word fracture no longer felt correct. The space between worlds had changed, not torn, opened. Valor stood only steps away now. No shimmer, no distortion, only distance, and even that felt temporary. "Elira," he said softly. She looked at him, not with fear, not with awe, recognition. "The city feels different," she whispered. "Yes." It stopped resisting. Valor did not answer immediately, because he was listening too, not to the gate, to the kingdom itself. Above them, throughout the capital, people stepped into the streets cautiously, expecting collapse, expecting fire, expecting judgment. Instead, they found silence. The marble beneath their feet no longer glowed violently. It breathed faintly, warm, steady. Children touched the fractures without fear. And for the first time, the stone answered gently. In the northern district, the blind bells of an abandoned shrine rang once by themselves. Not alarm, recognition. In the southern quarter, the old historian who first spoke Althira's name stepped outside at dawn and found flowers growing through cracks in the marble roads. White, thin-petaled, impossible. He knelt slowly beside them and began to cry. Inside the palace observatory, the shattered instruments from nights before had stopped vibrating. The scholars noticed something else instead. The stars above the capital had shifted slightly. Not position, relationship. Constellations long separated now aligned directly above the temple. One astronomer whispered, "It's responding upward." Another answered quietly, "No, we are." Below, Elira stepped closer to the opening, closer to Valor, closer to the place where separation had nearly stopped existing. "What happens now?" she asked. Valor's gaze shifted upward slightly, toward the city above them. "Now," he said, "the world decides whether to remember itself." Above the temple, the priesthood had split completely, not through violence, through belief. Some priests abandoned the ritual chambers entirely. Others remained inside them day and night, still chanting sequences no longer answered, still tracing symbols that no longer activated, still begging the seal to behave like a wall again. But the younger priests had begun asking different questions. Not, "How do we stop this?" but, "What was this before we feared it?" Inside the inner sanctuary, the high priest stood alone before the oldest ritual inscription in the temple. He had memorized it as a child, recited it thousands of times, protected it his entire life. Now, for the first time, he saw the missing lines. Not hidden, ignored. The stone beneath the inscription had shifted slightly, and new words had emerged beneath centuries of polished marble. The seal does not imprison ruin. It prepares the crossing. The high priest closed his eyes, not in denial, in grief. Far below, Valor suddenly looked away from Elira, toward the deeper darkness beyond the opening. His expression changed slightly. Not fear, memory. "You felt something," Elira said. "Yes." "What?" A long silence followed. Then, "The others." The words chilled the air between them. "Elira." His voice lowered carefully. "I was not the only one who crossed." Above them, throughout the city, people began dreaming the same dream. A shoreline beneath black stars, 12 pillars standing in shallow water, and figures walking calmly across the horizon toward a gate of light. By midday, thousands had reported it. The palace scholars called it resonance. The priests called it contamination. The people called it memory. Inside the hidden chamber, The completed circle began emitting pulses of soft light at regular intervals, not random, rhythmic, like breathing, like communication. The king stood within the circle again as the scholars mapped every pulse carefully. "It's stabilizing," one whispered. "No," another answered. "It's synchronizing." Below the temple, Elira lifted her hand slowly toward the open threshold. This time, her fingers crossed the boundary completely. No pain, no burning, no resistance, only warmth. Velor watched her carefully, not triumphant, not relieved, careful, as if history itself stood balanced on the smallest movement. "You still think this could destroy us?" she said softly. "Yes." "And yet you waited?" "Yes." "Why?" Another silence. Then finally, "Because remaining separated was destroying us already." Above them, across the kingdom, people began removing broken circle symbols from shrine walls voluntarily, not angrily, quietly, as if returning something borrowed. The ritual chants faded district by district. The bells stopped ringing in warning, and for the first time since the seal was forged, the capital no longer felt like a city containing something beneath it. It felt like a city built above something awakening. Inside the temple, the high priest descended slowly toward the lower vault again. Not as guardian, not as authority, as witness. When he entered the chamber, he stopped immediately, because Elira's hand was no longer entirely on her side of the threshold, and Velor's was no longer entirely beyond it. The boundary between them had begun dissolving where they touched, not violently, naturally. The high priest stared silently, then whispered the words he had spent his life refusing to understand. "The crossing has already begun." Above them, across the city, across the kingdom, the fractures beneath the marble roads dimmed for the first time. Not disappearing, resting, and deep beneath the foundations of the world, something ancient shifted peacefully in its sleep. The chamber remained silent, not because nothing had happened, because too much had. The completed circle beneath the kingdom continued breathing softly, each pulse spread outward through the ancient stone, not commanding, remembering. Elira withdrew her hand slowly from the threshold. The warmth remained, not upon her skin, within her. She looked toward Velor. "You said..." Her voice was barely louder than the silence surrounding them. "I was not the only one who crossed." Velor nodded. "No." "How many?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the opening, not beyond it, through it, as if distance had ceased to mean anything. "At first," he said quietly, "we believed there would only be one. The first witness, the first traveler, the first to survive the crossing." His expression softened, but the crossing was never meant for one. Above them, across the kingdom, the pulse beneath the marble continued, slow, steady. Children stopped speaking whenever it passed beneath their feet. Birds changed direction in mid-flight. The rivers shimmered for a heartbeat. Even the wind seemed to pause, just long enough to listen. The second crossed only a few years later. Velor continued. Then another, and another. Elira. He finally looked back at her. There were 12. The number settled over the chamber, not as surprise, as recognition. The same number that had appeared in the dreams, the same number carved into the oldest circle, the same number history had repeated, without ever explaining why. Far above, inside the royal observatory, the scholars unfolded maps older than the kingdom itself. For the first time, they noticed 12 faded symbols surrounding the first drawing of the completed circle. Symbols no one had questioned before, because everyone had assumed they represented stars. They did not. They represented names. Names? Elira whispered. Yes. Velor's eyes remained fixed upon the opening. Not titles. Not rulers. People. A long silence settled between them, the kind born not from uncertainty, but from truths too large to absorb all at once. What became of them? Elira finally asked. Velor smiled faintly, not with joy, with memory. They became what every traveler becomes. She frowned. I don't understand. No, he answered gently, because your world has forgotten what a journey truly is. Above the temple, the high priest slowly traced the newly revealed inscription with trembling fingers. The words no longer felt ancient. They felt unfinished, as though the stone itself had been waiting centuries for someone to read the sentence to its end. Inside the royal library, scribes worked through the night. Ancient scrolls once dismissed as myths were unsealed. Broken maps, half-burned journals, songs preserved only in fragments. Every one of them spoke of travelers, never conquerors, never prophets, only those who had gone beyond the horizon and promised one day to return. Far below, Elira's voice barely disturbed the silence. They came back? Velor looked at her. Some did. And the others? They found lives beyond the crossing. His answer carried no sorrow, only peace. As generations passed, he continued, your world remembered only those who returned, and forgot everyone who remained. The chamber fell silent once more, not because history had been erased, because memory had chosen the easier story. Above them, the dreams continued. Not every night, only when the pulse beneath the kingdom grew stronger. Each dream revealed another fragment, another face, another shoreline. Children began drawing 12 figures standing beneath unfamiliar constellations. None of them had seen the stars they drew, yet every drawing matched perfectly. Inside the palace, the king stood before the oldest map in the royal archives. For years, he had believed the blank places beyond the known kingdoms marked lands yet to be explored. Now, he wondered whether they had once been remembered, then forgotten. The borders, he whispered. They were never borders. One of the scholars looked up. What were they, Your Majesty? The king's eyes remained fixed upon the ancient parchment. They were departures. Far below. Elira remained silent. Her thoughts drifted toward the dreams Velor had described. The shoreline, the 12 pillars, the gate of light. I've seen that place, she said quietly. Yes, so has everyone else. Not everyone, Velor answered. Only those beginning to remember. She turned toward him. Remember what? His answer came without hesitation. The home your ancestors promised they would never forget. The words echoed through the chamber, not like a revelation, like something ancient, finally spoken aloud. Velor stepped closer to the threshold. Not to cross it, to remember it. There was a time, he said softly, when the crossing was not feared. Elira listened without interrupting. It was celebrated. The words felt impossible. Children were raised hearing stories of those who journeyed beyond. Families gathered to watch them leave. No one believed they were being lost. They believed they were being welcomed. Above them, inside the oldest sanctuary, the high priest uncovered another layer of polished stone beneath the ancient inscription. Not another warning, another prayer, faded by centuries, almost erased, yet still readable. May those who cross remember us, and may those who remain remember why they crossed. The old man read the words twice, then a third time. His hands trembled, not because the stone had changed, because history had, far below. Elira, Velor said, the greatest lie was never that I was a monster. She looked at him. It was that I was alone. Silence answered him, not empty, full. Somewhere beyond the opening, far beyond the visible light, another pulse answered the completed circle, not louder, far older, as though something, or someone, had heard the kingdom remember their name at last. Above the kingdom, the dreams began changing, no longer only the shoreline, no longer only the 12 pillars. Now, people began seeing faces, not strangers, familiar ones, mothers who had vanished generations before, explorers whose bodies had never been found, children lost to distant journeys. Every dream ended the same way. They smiled, not asking to return, showing that they had never truly been lost. Throughout the capital, fear slowly surrendered its place to longing. The palace scholars abandoned the word contamination. The priests stopped speaking of punishment. Even the oldest songs sounded different now, not because the words had changed, because people finally understood them. Below the temple, Elira looked once more toward the light beyond the threshold. "If they still live," she whispered, "why haven't they returned?" Velor remained silent for a long time, long enough for another pulse of light to pass beneath the chamber, long enough for the kingdom itself to seem to breathe. Then he answered. Some wished to, some tried, and some did. He looked directly into her eyes. But every crossing changes the traveler. You cannot return as the person who left. His words carried neither warning nor sorrow, only truth. The ones who came back, he continued quietly, returned with memories no language could fully carry. And slowly, your world stopped believing them. The chamber fell silent once more. Not because the story had ended, because history had only just begun telling the part it had hidden for centuries. Inside the hidden chamber, the completed circle pulsed once again. This time, the light did not stop beneath the temple. It continued beyond the kingdom, beyond the mountains, beyond every border ever drawn by human hands. Far across distant lands, people awaken from the same dream. Different languages, different kingdoms, different names. Yet every one of them remembered the shoreline, the 12 pillars, the gate of light, and someone waiting beside it, above the capital. The royal astronomers watched in silence as another constellation slowly emerged from the darkness. It had never appeared on any chart. Yet somehow, every scholar recognized it. No one could explain why. One by one, they lowered their instruments, not because there was nothing left to observe, because they understood that some discoveries begin long before they are measured. Far below, Elira stepped beside Velor. No boundary remained between them now, only choice. "Will they come back?" she asked. Velor looked beyond the threshold, toward a horizon only he could see. "They have always been trying," he smiled. Not with certainty, with hope. "But this is the first time," he whispered. "The world is finally ready to welcome them home." Above them, the completed circle released another quiet pulse, and somewhere beyond every known horizon, 12 distant lights answered, not as stars, as travelers. The kingdom did not celebrate, not yet. Some truths deserve silence before joy. The king stood alone upon the highest balcony of the palace. Below him, the capital no longer looked like a fortress built to keep something out. It looked like a doorway. Behind him, the high priest approached quietly. For the first time in many years, neither man wore the weight of certainty, only humility. "We guarded a gate," the high priest said softly, "and believed it was a wall." The king nodded. "We feared the horizon. Yes, because we mistook it for an ending." Far below, Elira remained beside Valor. The threshold no longer divided them. It united two worlds that had forgotten they once belonged together. "What happens next?" she asked. Valor watched the distant light beyond the crossing. "The same thing that has always happened." She waited. "People will choose. To remain, to leave, to return. And every choice," he said, "will become another story." The completed circle released one final pulse. It passed beneath the kingdom, across the rivers, through forgotten ruins, beyond deserts, beyond forests, beyond every kingdom that believed itself alone. Somewhere, an old traveler lifted their head. Somewhere else, a forgotten gate answered. And somewhere beyond the last known horizon, 12 figures turned toward the light, not because they had been summoned, because they had been remembered. The crossing did not change the world all at once. It changed what the world remembered. Above the temple, the capital awoke beneath a sky no one could fully explain. The constellations remained where they had always been, yet every astronomer insisted something had changed. Not their position, their meaning. Across the kingdom, the dreams continued. No longer as fragments, no longer as symbols. People began remembering faces, not strangers, not gods, people. A woman whose laughter carried across a shoreline beneath black stars. A child racing between 12 white pillars. An old traveler embraced by those waiting beyond a gate of light. Every dream ended the same way, with a face no one could quite remember, and yet everyone awoke believing they had once loved him. Far below the temple, Elira remained beside the crossing. Neither she nor Valor had moved for what felt like hours. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt familiar. Finally, she spoke. "Who were they?" Valor did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed upon the light beyond the crossing, as though every answer deserved patience. Then, very quietly, "They were never meant to become legends. They were simply people." Elira waited. She had expected another mystery, another prophecy. Instead, Valor smiled, a real smile, small, almost forgotten. "There was a time," he said, "when no one feared the crossing." She looked at him. It was never a prison. It was a road. The words felt impossible. Above them, Throughout the kingdom, another quiet pulse moved beneath the marble streets. Children paused only long enough to smile. The birds changed direction once more. The rivers shimmered softly beneath the morning sun. Nothing resisted the pulse anymore. Everything welcomed it. Far below, the marble beneath Valor's feet answered his presence. Not with light, with memory. Soft reflections spread across the completed circle. Not visions, remembrances. Elira watched a city unlike anything she had ever imagined. No walls, no fortress, no towers built to defend against an unseen enemy. Only gardens, open bridges, white stone, and people. Thousands of ordinary people, living without fear. The memories flowed quietly beneath the marble. Children chased one another between enormous white trees. Merchants laughed beside crystal canals. Musicians filled open squares with songs no one in the kingdom had heard for centuries. There were no ritual chambers, no guardians, no forbidden doors. The crossing stood openly at the heart of the city. Not hidden, celebrated. Families gathered around it as they might gather around a harbor. Some arrived, others departed. No one wept, because no one believed they were saying goodbye forever. Elira watched in silence. "This," she whispered, "was before the seal." Valor nodded. "Long before. The world was smaller then." She frowned. "It looks endless." He smiled again. "No. Our fear made it smaller." The memory continued. For the first time, Elira saw the 12 pillars as they had once been. Bright, whole, standing beneath an open sky, not surrounding a prison, welcoming every traveler who chose to cross. 12 figures slowly approached the crossing. Not kings, not priests, not rulers. Travelers. Each wore the same white mantle. Each bore the same unbroken circle upon their shoulder. No one stood before the others. No one commanded. They walked as equals. Around them, families embraced them. Children laughed. Old friends exchanged promises to meet again. No ceremony marked their departure, because departure itself had never been feared. Elira watched every face carefully. One of them felt strangely familiar, not because she recognized him, because she recognized his kindness. He spoke with children before speaking with scholars. He stopped to help an old traveler lift a heavy satchel. He laughed easily, without hesitation, without burden. Nothing about him resembled the being history had named the God of Ruin. Elira looked slowly toward Valor. "You knew him?" Valor never looked away from the memory. "Better than anyone?" She continued watching. The young traveler smiled once more, and for a heartbeat, Valor smiled exactly the same way. The memory lingered, not upon the crossing, upon the young traveler. Elira could not look away. There was nothing extraordinary about him. No crown, no weapon, no mark of power, only kindness. He stopped whenever someone called his name. He listened before he answered. He smiled more often than he spoke. "This," Elira whispered, "is not the man they feared." No. Valor's voice was almost lost beneath the quiet pulse of the completed circle. "It never was." The young traveler walked slowly among the gathered families. A little girl ran toward him. She wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. He lifted her into his arms. She laughed. He laughed with her. Nearby, an old woman adjusted the collar of his white mantle as though she had done so 100 times before. A young scholar hurried after him carrying a stack of scrolls. He accepted them with a grateful smile, then returned half of them. "You always carry too much," he told him. The scholar laughed. "So do you." Elira watched every small gesture, every smile, every quiet conversation. Nothing resembled the stories. Nothing resembled the monster. She looked toward Valor. "I've never seen you like this." He remained silent, not because he wished to hide the memory, because he had almost forgotten it himself. "The crossing," he said quietly, "did not change who we were. It revealed who we already had become." The memory drifted onward. The young traveler stopped before one of the 12 white pillars. He rested his hand upon the stone, not as someone performing a ritual, as someone greeting an old friend. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes and smiled, the same quiet smile Valor still wore. The memory continued. No great event unfolded, no miracle, no prophecy, only ordinary moments. The young traveler sat among children beneath the white trees. He listened as they argued over stories. He laughed when they insisted their versions were better. One little boy climbed onto the stone beside him. "Will you really cross tomorrow?" The young man smiled. "If the crossing allows it." The child frowned. "It always allows you." A warm laugh spread among the adults nearby. The young traveler simply shook his head. "No, the crossing belongs to no one. It only welcomes those who are ready." Elira watched him in silence. Every word sounded familiar, not because she had heard it before, because she had heard someone else speak exactly the same way. She slowly turned toward Valor. "You?" He met her eyes. "Yes, you've never changed." For the first time, something fragile crossed Valor's expression. Not sadness, not joy. Recognition. Everyone believes centuries change a person. He looked back toward the memory. They do, but not always in the way people imagine. His eyes rested upon the younger man, laughing beneath the trees. The crossing did not take that man away. It carried every part of him with it. Elira looked once more at the memory. There was still no warrior, no conqueror, no god, only someone who listened more than he spoke, someone who greeted strangers as friends, someone who looked upon the world with quiet wonder. The stories were wrong. Valor lowered his eyes. No, they were incomplete. The completed circle released another gentle pulse. For a brief heartbeat, the younger traveler lifted his head, as though, across centuries, he had felt someone remembering him. The memory drifted onward. Morning slowly gave way to evening. The city did not grow quieter. It grew warmer. The crossing stood open beneath the fading light. People continued arriving. People continued leaving. Every farewell carried the same promise. We'll meet again. Not hope. Certainty. Elira watched the young traveler move through the crowd. No herald announced his arrival. No guards walked beside him. Yet wherever he passed, people smiled. Children ran toward him before they ran toward their own parents. Old craftsmen greeted him by name. Merchants insisted he take bread for the journey. He thanked every one of them. He remembered every face. He wasn't their ruler, Elira whispered. Valor shook his head. No. Their priest? No. Their greatest scholar? A faint smile crossed his face. There were many wiser than I. She looked at him with quiet confusion. Then why does everyone seem to know him? Valor remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he answered, because I stayed. The words settled softly between them. Not as an explanation, as a mystery. Before Elira could ask another question, someone entered the memory. A young woman. She crossed the square without haste. The crowd greeted her with the same warmth, not because she held authority, because her presence carried peace. The young traveler looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke, neither needed to. They smiled, not as strangers, not as lovers, as two souls who had crossed many roads together. Elira, Elira whispered. Valor nodded gently. Yes. She joined him beneath the nearest pillar. For a while, they simply watched the people, the children, the travelers, the families saying farewell. Finally, Elira spoke. They're afraid." The young traveler smiled softly. "They always are, but they still choose to cross. Because hope has always been stronger than fear." Elira looked toward the open gate. "And if one day fear becomes stronger?" He followed her gaze, then answered with complete certainty. "Then someone will have to remind them?" The memory faded slowly, but those final words remained, not like prophecy, like a promise. The memory dissolved, the gardens disappeared, the white pillars faded, the voices became echoes, until only the completed circle remained beneath the temple. Elira stood motionless. She no longer saw the being history had called the god of ruin. She saw only the traveler, the man who had laughed with children, the man who remembered every face, the man who believed every journey deserved a welcome. Slowly, she turned toward Valor. For a long moment, she searched his face, not for the legend, for the man. Finally, she asked the question that had waited between them since the crossing began. Who was he? Valor closed his eyes. The pulse beneath the chamber continued, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of a world remembering itself. When he finally spoke, his voice carried neither pride nor sorrow, only home. Before history gave me another name, before fear turned memory into warning, before the crossing became a prison, I was simply one of the 12. He opened his eyes. Then, for the first time in centuries, he spoke the name no one living had ever heard. My name was Aaron. The completed circle answered, not with light, with recognition. A single pulse traveled outward beneath the kingdom, across the marble streets, across the rivers, across forgotten ruins. Far above, every bell in the capital rang once, not as an alarm, not in celebration, as remembrance. The high priest slowly lifted his head. The king stopped where he stood. Children throughout the city looked toward the temple without knowing why. Somewhere beyond every known horizon, one distant light answered. Then another. Then another. Elira whispered the name once. Aaron. It no longer sounded unfamiliar. It sounded like something the world had always known and had finally remembered. The bells did not ring again. One was enough. The name lingered across the kingdom long after its echo had faded. No one understood why. No one could explain why the sound had stirred something deep within them. Yet throughout the capital, people repeated the same unfamiliar name beneath their breath. Aaron. Some spoke it as though remembering an old friend. Others whispered it without realizing they had done so. Children asked their parents who Aaron had been. The parents had no answer. Inside the royal archives, every scribe searched feverishly through scroll after scroll. Royal records, temple records, genealogies, songs, journals, even the oldest stone inscriptions. Nothing, not a single mention. It was as though the name had never belonged to the world at all. The king stood silently among them. Impossible, he whispered. If he lived, if he stood at the center of everything, how can nothing remain? No scholar answered, because none of them had ever encountered an absence so complete. Far below the temple, Elira still looked at Veilor. No, at Aaron. The name had changed nothing about his face, yet somehow, everything had changed. "You said," she whispered, "before history gave you another name." He nodded. Yes. What happened to Aaron? For the first time, Aaron did not answer. Not because he wished to hide the truth, because remembering it still hurt. The completed circle beneath them released another slow pulse. This one felt different, not like memory, like morning. And somewhere beyond the visible light, the horizon answered. Not with 12 lights, only 11. Elira followed the distant horizon. The 11 lights remained, steady, patient, waiting. She counted them again, once, then twice, then a third time. There was no mistake, only 11. Slowly, she turned back toward Aaron. There were 12. Yes, there are only 11. Yes. Silence settled between them, not uncertain, inevitable. Her voice grew quieter. The 12th never returned. Aaron lowered his eyes. No, he never did. The words carried no bitterness, only acceptance. Above them, another gentle pulse crossed the kingdom. Far beyond the capital, people awakened from dreams they could not explain. This time, they no longer saw 12 travelers, only 11. One place remained empty, not forgotten, waiting. Below the temple, Elira stepped closer. So the stories were true. They were. Someone never came home. Yes. She searched his face. The answer already frightened her. Do you know what became of him? Aaron did not speak. Instead, he looked toward the crossing, toward the endless light beyond it. His expression softened, not as one remembering another, as one remembering himself. I have spent centuries, he said quietly, listening to people mourn a man, without ever realizing they were speaking to him. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the completed circle seemed to pause. Elira felt the truth before she understood it. Her heartbeat slowed. No, she whispered. Aaron met her eyes. The kindness she had seen within the memories had never left them. I was the 12th. No sound followed his words. No thunder, no light, only silence, the kind that arrives when the truth no longer needs to defend itself. Elira stared at him, not because she doubted him, because she suddenly understood why every story had felt incomplete. You, she whispered, never came back. Aaron nodded. No, but I'm standing here, now. Yes. She struggled to understand. What happened? For a long while, he simply watched the light beyond the crossing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. The crossing was never a road that everyone walked together. It welcomed each traveler differently. The journey each of us took belonged only to us. The completed circle beneath them answered with another quiet pulse. The memory returned, not as a distant vision, as though the chamber itself remembered. The 12 stood before the open gate. No fear, no hesitation, only quiet expectation. Elira smiled at each of them in turn, one by one. They stepped into the light. No struggle, no violence, no farewell filled with despair, only trust. The light embraced them. Then, the memory changed. Not all at once, almost imperceptibly. One by one, figures began returning. The first, then another, then another. Each emerged carrying the same peaceful expression, changed, yet unmistakably themselves. Families welcomed them home with tears of joy. The crossing had kept its promise. Then the 11th returned. The waiting crowd rejoiced. Songs filled the air. Children ran forward laughing. Only one place remained empty. One family continued waiting. One pair of eyes remained fixed upon the light, and the gate remained open. The memory did not end. It waited, just as those gathered around the crossing had waited. The songs slowly faded. The celebration became silence. The families who had welcomed their loved ones home remained together. Only one place stood empty. No one spoke. No one dared. Because hope had not yet surrendered. The gate remained open. Its light neither dimmed nor called. It simply waited. Elira watched the memory unfold. "How long?" she asked softly. "How long did they wait for you?" Aaron's eyes never left the gathering before him. "Days." The memory changed. The flowers left beside the crossing began to wither. Then weeks. The children stopped asking when the last traveler would return. Then years. The youngest among them grew into adults. The elders who had waited each morning slowly disappeared from the crowd. Still, the gate remained open, and every dawn, someone came. Not because they believed he would surely return, because they refused to be the first person who wasn't there. If he did. Tears gathered in Elira's eyes. They never stopped waiting. No, they kept faith longer than history remembers. The memory shifted once more. The city itself began to change. The joyful songs became quieter. Questions replaced certainty. Then questions became fear. Not because anyone had seen evil, because no one could explain absence. Finally, Elira turned toward Aaron. "You could have come back." Her voice trembled. "Couldn't you?" For the first time, pain crossed his face. Real, human, ancient. "Yes," the single word echoed through the chamber. Elira's breath caught. "You chose to stay." Aaron closed his eyes. "I chose," he whispered, "to make sure the crossing would never close behind the others." The completed circle released another quiet pulse. Not triumphant, not tragic, grateful. For the first time, the crossing itself seemed to remember the one who had remained beside it. Elira could not speak. The truth settled over her slowly, not because it was difficult to understand, because it was impossible to imagine. "You stayed," she whispered. "For them." Aaron nodded. The crossing was alive. It was never a doorway built of stone. It was a promise. If no one remained, the promise would break. The completed circle pulsed softly beneath their feet. Its rhythm no longer resembled memory. It resembled gratitude. The memory returned once more. The last of the 11 stepped back into the world. Their families embraced them. The city rejoiced. No one noticed that the light beyond the crossing had begun to weaken, except one man, Aaron. He turned back toward the gate, not because someone commanded him, not because prophecy demanded it, because he understood something the others had not yet seen. The crossing was closing, not forever, but long enough to separate two worlds. Elira reached for him. "Aaron." He looked back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Everything that needed saying already lived in their eyes. "If you stay," she whispered, "you may never return." He smiled, not with courage, with peace. "Then make sure," he answered softly, "that they never fear this place." Before she could reach him, he stepped backward into the light, not fleeing, not falling, choosing. The crossing answered, Its light deepened, the fading horizon steadied. The gate remained open, long enough for every remaining traveler to pass safely home. Then it closed, not like a prison, like the final page of a book. The memory dissolved. Elira stood frozen. "So you saved them?" Aaron lowered his head. "I stayed," he whispered. "So no one else would have to." Silence returned to the chamber. Not the silence of mystery, the silence of understanding. Elira could no longer see the being the world had feared, only the man who had remained behind. So they forgot. Aaron looked toward the completed circle. No, they remembered, but memory cannot survive untouched by grief. Above them, the memory continued. The years passed. Those who had witnessed the last crossing grew old. Their children inherited the story, but not the certainty. The man who had remained beyond the gate became the man who never returned. The man who never returned became the man the crossing had taken. The man the crossing had taken became the guardian of the gate. Another generation passed. The guardian became the keeper. The keeper became the watcher. Another century. The watcher became the one who would not let others pass. Another century. Fear filled the spaces where memory had once lived. The gate no longer welcomed. It demanded. The guardian no longer protected. He imprisoned. The stories changed. Not all at once. One frightened generation at a time, until mothers warned their children, "Do not go near the crossing. The one beyond it will never let you return." The name Aaron disappeared first, then the traveler, then the friend, then the guardian. Only one name remained. Velor. Elira closed her eyes, not to escape the truth, to endure it. "They buried you," she whispered. "They buried who you were." Aaron slowly shook his head. "No. They buried the part of themselves that still believed the horizon was a promise." He looked toward the light beyond the crossing. His voice remained gentle. "I never became the god of ruin. The world simply needed someone to carry the weight of its fear." The completed circle released another quiet pulse. This one reached farther than any before, across forgotten mountains, across silent seas, across every land where the old stories had become warnings, and somewhere beyond every remembered road, a lone traveler stopped, lifted their head, and smiled, as though after centuries, someone had finally spoken the truth aloud. The pulse faded, not because the crossing had fallen silent, because it had finally been heard. Far above the hidden chamber, the high priest remained alone within the oldest sanctuary. For a long time, he stood before the ancient inscription, not reading it, remembering it. He slowly lifted his hand. Then, for the first time in the history of the kingdom, he erased the final ritual mark carved beneath the words, not in anger, not in shame, in gratitude. Below him, the king stood at the highest window of the palace. The capital stretched toward every horizon. No longer a fortress, no longer a prison built around fear, a beginning. The commander of the royal guard approached quietly. "Your Majesty, the people are waiting." The king did not turn. "What are they waiting for?" "They are asking what we should tell them." A long silence followed. Then the king smiled, a weary smile. "The truth." The commander hesitated. "All of it?" The king looked toward the temple. "No, only the first step. Tell them that the crossing was never our enemy." Far below, Elira stood beside Aaron. Neither reached for the other, neither needed to. The distance between them had long since disappeared. "You carried their fear," she said softly, "for centuries." Yes. And now? Aaron looked beyond the crossing, toward the 11 distant lights waiting beyond every known horizon. Now, he whispered, they must choose whether to carry hope instead. Another gentle pulse crossed the completed circle. This time, it was answered immediately, not by one distant light, not by 11, but by countless small lights, awakening one after another beyond the edge of the known world. Elira watched them spread across the darkness, like dawn arriving before the sun. They're coming, Aaron smiled, not with certainty, with quiet faith. No, he said, they've already begun. The kingdom did not awaken in fear. It awakened in expectation. No alarms rang, no soldiers filled the streets, no priest called the people to repentance. Instead, the capital waited, as though every stone beneath its foundations already knew that something long promised had finally begun. The completed circle beneath the temple pulsed only once, gentle, steady, not calling, answering. Far above, the first light of dawn touched the highest towers. The marble no longer reflected the pale light of morning. It seemed to carry its own. Throughout the city, people opened their doors before sunrise. No decree had summoned them, no messenger had spoken, yet everyone stepped into the streets. Children, merchants, scholars, old soldiers, young priests. All of them looked toward the temple, not because they expected to witness a miracle, because they felt they should be there, inside the royal palace. The king stood alone before the eastern balcony. The commander approached quietly. "Your Majesty, they're gathering." The king nodded. "I know. They're waiting for your command." The king remained silent. Then he smiled faintly. "For centuries," he said, "every command we gave was born from fear." He looked toward the temple. "Today, let them choose without one." The commander bowed, not to his king, to the man who had finally stopped ruling through certainty. Far below, Elira stood beside Aaron. Neither of them spoke. The crossing stood open before them, its light calmer than it had ever been, almost welcoming. After a long silence, Elira asked, "Are you afraid?" Aaron smiled, not because the answer was simple, because it had taken him centuries to find it. "Yes." She looked at him. "I always am." He turned toward the light. "But hope," he whispered, "has finally become stronger." Far beyond the visible horizon, the first distant light began moving, not flickering, approaching. The distant light drew closer, not quickly, not slowly, with the quiet certainty of someone returning home. No one in the capital spoke. No one dared. Across the marble streets, thousands of eyes remained fixed upon the temple. Children reached for their parents' hands. The elders stood without leaning upon their canes. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Far below, the crossing brightened, not with blinding radiance, with recognition. The completed circle released another gentle pulse. This time, the light beyond the threshold answered immediately. The horizon shimmered. A single figure emerged, not suddenly, gradually, like a memory taking shape. A traveler, clothed in the same white mantle Elira had seen within the memories. The unbroken circle still rested upon one shoulder. Time had not claimed it. The traveler stepped across the threshold. 1 foot, then another. The light welcomed rather than released. When both feet touched the stone, the completed circle fell completely still. For the first time since the seal had been forged, there was perfect silence. The traveler looked around slowly, not with confusion, with wonder, as though every familiar place had become beautifully unfamiliar. His eyes rested upon Aaron. A long silence followed. Neither man moved, neither needed to. Centuries disappeared between them. The traveler smiled. "Aaron," he whispered, not as one greeting a legend, as one greeting an old friend. Aaron smiled in return. His voice trembled for the first time. "You took your time." The traveler laughed softly. "So did you." Elira stood motionless. History was no longer being remembered. It was happening. Above the temple, the first rays of the rising sun crossed the capital. For the first time in generations, the bells rang freely, not because someone had ordered them, because no warning remained to be given. No one moved. Not the king, not the high priest, not the thousands gathered throughout the capital. The first traveler had returned, not as prophecy, not as miracle, as promise fulfilled. The traveler slowly knelt. His hand touched the marble of the completed circle. He closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a quiet smile appeared upon his face. "It still remembers." Aaron knelt beside him. "So do you." The traveler opened his eyes. "I never forgot." The words spread through the chamber like the first warmth of morning. Above them, the completed circle answered once more. Another gentle pulse flowed beneath the kingdom. This time, it did not stop at the mountains. It crossed deserts. It crossed seas. It crossed forests no map had ever named. Far beyond every horizon, another distant light began to move, then another and another across the capital. People watched in silent wonder as new lights appeared in the morning sky, not falling from above, approaching from beyond. Children pointed toward them. No one told them to be afraid. The elders wept quietly, not because the impossible was happening, because they had lived long enough to witness hope become history again. Inside the temple, the high priest slowly removed the ceremonial seal from around his neck, the symbol he had carried his entire life. He looked at it one final time, then placed it gently upon the stone beside the completed circle, not abandoning it, returning it. "The gate no longer needs a guardian," he whispered. "It needs witnesses." The king heard those words. He stepped forward, then removed his own royal seal. He placed it beside the high priests, one by one. The scholars, the priests, the guards, the people. No one was commanded, no one was expected. Yet all who carried symbols of fear laid them quietly upon the marble, not as surrender, as release. Aaron watched them. For the first time in centuries, the burden he had carried alone no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to a world that had chosen to remember. The chamber grew quiet once more, not because the moment had ended, because another had begun. The first traveler stood beside Aaron, beyond the crossing. More lights continued drawing nearer, patient, unhurried, each one carrying a promise centuries old. Elira watched them in silence. Then she looked toward Aaron. "You waited all this time, so they could return." "Yes, and now they are." "Yes." A long silence followed. She smiled. "Then your journey is over?" Aaron did not answer. Instead, He looked toward the completed circle. Its gentle light remained steady. For the first time, it no longer needed him. Elira noticed the change immediately. "The crossing," she whispered. "It doesn't depend on you anymore. No, it remembers. And now, so does the world." Far above, the first rays of the rising sun poured through the open sanctuary. The light reached the completed circle. It crossed the ancient stone, then gently settled upon Aaron. The traveler beside him smiled knowingly. "You've carried the first watch," he said softly, "for longer than anyone should." Aaron lowered his eyes. "I promised, and you kept that promise." The traveler stepped forward. He placed one hand upon Aaron's shoulder. "No one crosses alone anymore." The words echoed gently through the chamber. Elira suddenly understood. The burden that had rested upon one soul for centuries had finally become the responsibility of many. She looked at Aaron. "What will you do now?" He smiled. Not as the guardian, not as Valor, not even as Aaron, the forgotten traveler, simply as a man who had finally reached the end of a very long road. "I will make one last choice." The completed circle answered with a quiet pulse, not urging him, waiting. For the first time since the crossing began, its future no longer depended upon destiny. It depended upon freedom. The completed circle remained still. No pulse, no light, no voice. It no longer needed to call. The world had answered. Aaron stepped slowly toward the crossing, not because he had to, because for the first time in centuries, he was free to choose. Elira walked beside him. Neither spoke. Some journeys deserve silence. They reached the edge of the light. The first traveler waited there. So did the others, one by one. The remaining lights had crossed the horizon. Not all had returned to the kingdom. Some remained beyond the threshold, watching, smiling, waiting, not for Aaron, for his decision. He stood before the crossing for a long time, long enough for the first rays of the morning sun to fill the chamber completely. Then he turned toward Elira. "When we first met," he said softly, "you believed I was the end of your story." She smiled through quiet tears. "I was wrong. Yes, you were the beginning of mine." The words lingered between them, not as farewell, as gratitude. Elira looked toward the world above them. The frightened kingdom she had once known was gone. Children laughed where rituals had once been whispered. The bells rang without warning. The temple stood open. No guards, no barriers, only people, living, remembering, choosing. She looked back at Aaron. "What happens to the crossing now?" He smiled. "It belongs to those who refuse to rule it. It belongs to those who are willing to walk it." He extended his hand, not asking her to follow, inviting her to understand. She took it. The completed circle answered one final time. A warm light spread gently beneath the ancient stone, not awakening, resting, its purpose fulfilled. Aaron released her hand. "You once asked me what happens after the crossing." Elira nodded. "You never answered." He looked toward the endless horizon, then back toward the waking world. "I couldn't, because every answer belongs to the one who chooses." He stepped backward, not disappearing, crossing. The travelers welcomed him home. No songs, no ceremony, only embraces that had waited centuries to be completed. Elira watched until the light became part of the horizon once more. Then she turned, not toward the past, toward the kingdom, toward the people who would now write the next chapter themselves. Above the temple, the sun finally rose above the eastern mountains. Its light touched every rooftop, every road, every face. For the first time since the crossing had been forgotten, the world greeted the dawn without fear.